The problem, Desmond Fossey decided as he stood in front of his wardrobe in nothing but an old pair of shorts, was not that he was the alpha of the Blackwood pack. The problem was not that he had 160 wolves who depended on him for leadership, stability, and the occasional strongly worded letter to the county planning office about zoning violations. The problem was that he owned, according to the last count Marcus had conducted with the pained precision of a man cataloging war crimes, 37 shirts, and he could not find a single one. His wolf, a creature of operatic enthusiasm and zero practical skills, thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened. "She has taken them all," Apex projected, his internal voice rattling around Desmond's skull like a happy drunk in an empty ballroom. "Every last one. This is devotion. This is dedication. We should be honored. I should be dressed," Desmond muttered, staring at a row of empty hangars that looked like the skeletal remains of a once thriving civilization. "I have a meeting with the Pack Council in 40 minutes. "Attend shirtless," Apex continued. "They will respect the confidence. They will call a vote of no confidence." "Same word," his wolf replied, different energy. Desmond closed the wardrobe door, opened it again as if the shirts might have been hiding, and accepted his fate. Somewhere in this house, his mate had built a nest out of his entire identity, and he was going to have to do something about it. The thing was, it hadn't started like this. 6 weeks ago, it was a shirt. One shirt. His old gray Henley, the one with the frayed cuffs that he wore on Sundays when the pack house was quiet and there was nothing to do but read by the fire and let Bea lean against his shoulder. He'd looked for it, couldn't find it, and assumed it had been eaten by the dryer. The dryer in the Blackwood pack house was a malevolent appliance that had been devouring socks since 2014 and had recently graduated to larger prey. Then it was the flannel, the dark green one that smelled like pine sap because he'd worn it to chop wood the previous weekend. Then the cable-knit sweater his mother had made him, the one with the slightly lopsided collar that he loved precisely because it was lopsided. Then his work jacket, his spare hoodie, 2 more flannels, a thermal, and his good Henley, the one without the frayed cuffs, the one he wore when he wanted to look like he hadn't just rolled out of the woods, which, to be fair, he usually had. Marcus Thorne, his beta, had started tracking the disappearances on a spreadsheet. "We're averaging 2.3 garments per week," Marcus had reported yesterday, standing in Desmond's office with the quiet gravity of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "At this rate, you'll be functionally shirtless by mid-October." "Thank you, Marcus." "I've taken the liberty of ordering replacements, 3 Henleys, 2 flannels, 1 thermal. They should arrive Thursday." "She'll take those too." Marcus had paused, his pen hovering over his clipboard. "Then we have a systemic problem, sir." They did, and Desmond knew it. He'd known it for weeks, in the way you know something is wrong when you can't quite look at it directly. The way you know the roof is leaking because the ceiling is sagging, but you keep putting a bucket under it instead of climbing up to fix the hole. His Omega mate, the quiet, careful, heartbreakingly lovely Beatrice, was stealing his clothes. And he didn't know how to talk to her about it without breaking something fragile. He pulled on the only shirt he could find, an ancient, paint-stained undershirt from the back of a drawer that had survived only because it smelled more like turpentine than like him, and headed downstairs. The Blackwood pack house was a rambling Victorian on 12 acres of forest land, the kind of house that had been added to so many times over the decades that the floor plan made sense only if you'd grown up in it, and sometimes not even then. It smelled like coffee, pine, old wood, and the particular warm musk of a dozen wolves who considered this place home. Someone had left boots in the hallway again. Someone else had left a half-eaten sandwich on the banister. The kitchen radio was playing something country, and through the back window, Desmond could see 2 of the younger wolves, Nate and Ellis, chasing each other across the back field in wolf form, their fur catching the early morning light. It was home. It had been home for 5 generations of Fosses, and Desmond loved it with the uncomplicated, bone-deep love of someone who had never had to earn a place in the world. It had simply been given to him, along with the title, the responsibility, and the weight of every expectation his father had ever laid on his shoulders. That was a thought he didn't need right now. He pushed it away. In the kitchen, he found his sister, Rowan, who was technically the pack's head of operations and practically the only reason the house hadn't burned down. She was sitting at the massive oak table with a mug of coffee, her dark hair piled on top of her head in a knot held together by what appeared to be a pencil and sheer willpower. She had the look of someone who'd already made 4 decisions before breakfast and was working on a 5th. She looked up at him, looked at the paint-stained shirt, raised one eyebrow. "Don't," he said. "I didn't say anything." "Your eyebrow said it." "My eyebrow is an independent entity with its own opinions." She took a sip of coffee. "She took the green flannel, didn't she?" "She took all of them, Ro." Rowan's expression shifted from amused to something more careful. "All of them. Every shirt I own, plus 2 jackets, a sweater, and the wool blanket from the foot of our bed." He poured himself a coffee, the motion automatic. "Marcus is tracking it on a spreadsheet." "Of course he is." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "Des, you know what nesting means." "I know what nesting means." "Do you? Because you're standing in my kitchen wearing a shirt that smells like a hardware store and you look more annoyed than concerned." That landed. It landed because she was right, and because Rowan had always been better than him at seeing the thing behind the thing. Nesting wasn't a quirk. It wasn't a funny relationship story. For an Omega, it was a deep, instinctive drive to create safety. And the fact that B was building her safety entirely out of his scent meant that she didn't feel safe anywhere else. But he was annoyed. He was annoyed because he'd been losing clothes for 6 weeks and hadn't said anything. Because saying something felt like poking a bruise. And because the longer he didn't say anything, the bigger the bruise got. And now he was standing in a paint-stained shirt, and he had a council meeting, and he was irritated with himself for being irritated with her, which made him more irritated, which was a loop he couldn't seem to exit. "Our mate is nesting," Apex observed, with the serene wisdom of someone who had never once had to navigate a complicated emotion. "This is beautiful. She is making a home out of us." "She's making a home out of my wardrobe," Desmond said under his breath. "Same thing," Apex insisted. It was not the same thing. Or maybe it was. That was the problem. He needed to clear his head. He told Marcus to push the council meeting by an hour. Marcus's expression suggested this was the professional equivalent of a war crime, but he complied. Desmond walked out the back door, past the garden where the pack grew tomatoes and herbs and an inexplicable amount of kale that no one remembered planting. Across the back field where Nate and Ellis were still roughhousing in wolf form. Ellis had Nate pinned by the scruff and was shaking him like a chew toy. Nate, 3 years older and supposedly more mature, was making a noise like a squeaky tennis ball. Neither of them noticed their alpha walk past, which was either a sign of deep comfort in their territory or a sign that their situational awareness needed serious work. Desmond chose to believe the former. He stripped at the edge of the woods, folding his terrible shirt and setting it on a rock. The shift came easy, the way it always did when he needed it, bones cracking and reforming, muscles stretching into their other shape. The brief, sharp pain of it already fading by the time his paws hit the dirt. He was a large black wolf, heavy in the shoulders, built for endurance rather than speed. The forest opened up around him in a rush of scent and sound. Damp earth, pine needles, the distant trickle of the creek, a rabbit 200 yards to the east that wasn't worth the effort. He ran. Not fast, not with purpose, just ran, the way wolves needed to, the way he'd been neglecting for weeks because there was always a meeting, always a decision, always something that needed the man and not the animal. The ground was soft under his paws. The air was cold and clean. His thoughts, so knotted in human form, loosened into something simpler. Instinct, territory, the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Somewhere in the middle of the run, he passed through a patch of wild chamomile, and the scent hit him so hard he stumbled. Bee. It smelled like bee. And just like that, the peace was gone, replaced by the ache of a problem he didn't know how to solve. He slowed, then stopped, standing in a clearing with the morning light filtering through the canopy, breathing in the ghost of her scent and feeling the distance between them like a physical thing. He shifted back, the cold air raising goose flesh on his bare skin. He sat on a fallen log, bare-skinned and human, and no closer to an answer than when he'd started. The run had done what runs always did, burned off the surface tension. But the thing underneath was still there, waiting. He dressed and walked back to the house. He had a council meeting to run, and a mate he didn't know how to reach. Beatrice was in the nest. She was always in the nest now, or near it, or thinking about it. It had started as a small thing, a single shirt tucked under her pillow, a secret so minor it barely registered as one. Now it filled the entire floor of the guest room closet at the end of the upstairs hall, a room she'd claimed quietly, without asking, the way she did everything, by making herself so small that no one noticed until it was already done. Her wolf, who was neither small nor quiet, had opinions about this. "Oh, we're doing the guilt thing again. Riveting. Let me get comfortable." She delivered her internal commentary with the bored confidence of someone who had never been uncertain about a single thing in her life. Where B was cautious, Vixen was blunt. Where B apologized, Vixen rolled her eyes so hard you could practically hear it. B adjusted the Henley, tucking it more securely against the wall of the closet where it formed part of the nest's soft barrier. The fabric was worn to nothing, the cuffs fraying, and it smelled so powerfully of Desmond, pine, wood smoke, the clean musk underneath that was just him, that she could close her eyes and almost believe he was holding her. Almost. Not quite. Almost was the best she could do. "You know what would work better than almost?" Vixen said. "The actual man. He's downstairs. He has arms. They work." "It's not the same," Bea whispered. "It's literally the same. It's the same scent, attached to the same person, who, and I cannot stress this enough, would be thrilled to hold you. He'd probably write a poem about it. A bad poem, with too many adjectives." But Bea couldn't explain it, not even to her own wolf. The nest wasn't about Desmond's arms, though she loved his arms. It was about having something that couldn't leave. A shirt didn't wake up one morning and decide you were too much trouble. A flannel didn't need the room for its own pups. A sweater didn't look at you with kind, tired eyes and say, "You'll find your people, sweetheart." She'd grown up packless. That word, packless, sounded clinical, like a medical term, something you'd read in a textbook. It didn't capture what it actually was. What it actually was? 15 years of sleeping in places that belonged to other people. 15 years of keeping her things in a bag she could carry. 15 years of learning, through repetition and pain, that home was a temporary state, that comfort was borrowed, that the moment you started to feel safe was the moment you needed to start planning your exit. Her parents had been Omega healers, gentle people who'd chosen independence over pack life. They'd been killed by rogues when she was 7. She remembered her mother's hands, always warm. She remembered the sound of her father singing off-key while he cooked. She remembered the morning after, when the hands and the singing were gone, and the world became a series of rooms she passed through without leaving a mark. Desmond's shirt had been the first thing she'd ever wanted to keep. She hadn't meant to take it. He'd left it draped over the back of the chair in the kitchen, months ago, before the bond was declared, back when he was still courting her with a clumsy, earnest intensity that she found both terrifying and irresistible. He'd brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He'd made her tea every morning, getting the order wrong for 3 weeks straight before Rowan finally told him she took honey, not sugar. He'd once walked into a door frame because she'd smiled at him across the kitchen. She'd picked up the shirt to move it. That was all. But the scent had hit her, pine and leather and something warm and steady that her wolf recognized before her brain caught up, and her hand had closed on the fabric, and she had not let go. That night she'd slept with it pressed to her face, and for the first time in 15 years, the silence in her chest had felt like peace instead of emptiness. "Finally," Vixen had said, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting years for their human to catch up. "Now do the rest of his wardrobe." B had not done the rest of his wardrobe. Not immediately. Phase 1 had been 1 shirt. Phase 2 had been 3. Phase 3 had been an escalation that B couldn't seem to control. a tide of instinct that pulled her under every time she tried to resist it. The nest grew. It demanded new materials, specific textures, precise arrangements. It was not a pile. It was an architecture, each garment placed with the care of a mason laying stones, the whole thing curving inward like a shell, like a den, like the kind of place a wolf would crawl into and never leave. She knew it was too much. She knew, logically, clinically, that taking her alpha's entire wardrobe was not a normal expression of pair bonding. She knew Marcus had noticed. She knew Rowan had noticed. She was fairly certain the entire pack had noticed, because wolf senses made secrecy almost impossible, and because Desmond had been wearing increasingly terrible shirts for the past month, and no one had said anything, which was worse than if they had, because the silence meant they were being kind, and kindness from other people's packs had always been the thing that came right before being asked to leave. She pressed her face into the green flannel and breathed. "You're catastrophizing again," Vixen said. "For the record, no one is kicking us out. We are mated to the alpha. We are literally the least kickable out person in this entire pack. We are structurally unkickable. It is architecturally impossible." "People leave," Bee whispered. "People always leave." "He walked into a door frame because you smiled," Vixen reminded her. "He is not leaving." Bee closed her eyes. A wave of dizziness rolled through her, the third one today. A strange lightheadedness that came and went like weather. She pressed her palm flat against the wall until it passed. "That's new," Vixen said, and for the first time her voice lost its sardonic edge, replaced by something sharper, attentive. "That's happened 3 times today." "It's the stress," Bee said. Vixen was quiet for a beat. "It's not the stress." "It's definitely the stress." "It's definitely not the stress. But we'll circle back to this. You're not ready for this conversation." That evening, Desmond came home from the council meeting to find Rowan waiting for him in the hallway with 2 mugs of tea, which was never a good sign. Rowan only made tea when she was about to tell him something he didn't want to hear. "Walk with me," she said, handing him a mug. They walked the perimeter of the house, a habit left over from their father's time. The old alpha had walked the property line every evening, checking the wards, marking the territory. Desmond had kept the tradition, though his version involved less territorial marking and more trying to figure out which teenager had left the gate open again. "I talked to the Henleys in town today," Rowan said, using the pack's common shorthand for their human neighbors. "Mrs. Henley asked why you've been mowing the lawn in a painting smock." "It's not a painting smock, it's a shirt." "It has paint on it, Des." "It's the only shirt I have." Rowan was quiet for a moment. The evening light was turning the trees gold. Somewhere in the woods an owl called, and 2 of the younger wolves, patrolling in wolf form, their shapes visible between the trees, paused to listen. "She's getting worse, isn't she?" Rowan said. It wasn't a question. Desmond's jaw tightened. It's not worse. It's just more. More is worse when it comes to nesting like this. You know that. An omega who nests this hard is an omega who doesn't feel safe. And if she doesn't feel safe in the home of her own alpha, I know what it means, Rowan. Then do something about it. Not as an alpha, as her mate. She said it gently, but it landed like a hammer. Because the truth was, he hadn't done anything about it. He'd noticed, and he'd worried, and he'd lost sleep over it, and he'd talked to Marcus about spreadsheets, but he hadn't actually sat down with Bee and said the one thing that mattered. What do you need? Because he was afraid of the answer. That night, he found her in the nest. He stood in the doorway of the guest room closet, looking at what she'd built, and felt something twist in his chest. Not annoyance, not anymore. Just, finally, a clear and terrifying understanding of what she was asking for. He sat down on the floor of the closet, careful, as if he were approaching something wild. Bee was surrounded by his clothes, a fortress of fabric, and she looked up at him with eyes that held every uncertainty in the world. "We need to talk," he said, and he heard his father's voice in the words, that cold, hard edge that meant business, that meant disappointment, that meant you're not enough and never will be. Bee flinched. Of course she did. She knew what that voice meant. She'd heard it from every pack that ever let her go. About the nest, he continued, and the words came out clipped, efficient, like he was running a meeting instead of standing in his mate's sanctuary. Bee, this has to stop. The world went very still. In the back of her mind, Vixen erupted. No, absolutely not. We are not apologizing. We are not folding up our home and handing it over because he's having a feelings tantrum. Tell him to go buy more shirts. Tell him to... But Bee wasn't listening. Bee had gone to the place she always went when someone told her she was too much. The small, cold, survivable place inside herself where nothing could reach her. It was the apology that undid Desmond. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too fast, too practiced. Too much like a woman who had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space. She wasn't hearing him. She was hearing every alpha who had ever told her she was too much trouble to keep. Stop talking, Apex said, and for once, his voice wasn't a shout. It was an urgent, desperate whisper. Stop talking right now. But the damage was done. Bee stood up, her movements careful and contained, and she began to pull shirts from the nest with the efficiency of someone dismantling something they'd built with their whole heart. She folded the green flannel. She folded the Henley. She stacked them in a neat pile, her hands steady, her face blank. Bee, stop. That's not what It's fine. Her voice was a closed door. You need your clothes. I understand. I don't want you to just... I said it's fine, Desmond. Tell him it's not fine, Vixen snarled. Tell him we built this with our hands and our heart, and it took us weeks, and he can take his 37 shirts and... Silence. It came without warning, mid-sentence, like a radio cutting out. One moment Vixen was there, fierce and furious and real, and the next, nothing. A void where her wolf had been. Cold, airless, absolute. Bee's hands stopped moving. She stood very still, holding a folded flannel, and felt the absence hit her like a physical blow. It was the worst thing she had ever felt, worse than losing the garden room, worse than the morning after her parents died, because Vixen had been there for all of those things. Vixen had been the voice in the dark that said, "Get up, keep moving, we're not done yet." And now the voice was gone. She picked up the pile of clothes and held it out to him. Her hands were trembling, just barely, a vibration so fine he might have missed it if he weren't a wolf, if he weren't attuned to every frequency of her body, the way he'd been attuned since the first moment he'd caught her scent across a crowded room and felt the ground shift under him. He took the clothes. He didn't know what else to do. She was offering them and refusing to look at him, and the air between them smelled like salt and shame and something breaking. "Thank you," he said, and the word felt like swallowing glass. She nodded once, a sharp little motion, and walked past him out of the room. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, quiet and quick, and then the back door opening and closing. He stood in the guest room, holding a pile of his own shirts, and felt the bond between them, usually a warm, steady hum, go thin and cold, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. From across the house, through the bond, he felt her shift, the crack of bones reforming, the brief spike of pain, and then the lighter, faster rhythm of her wolf's heartbeat, moving away from the house, into the trees. She was running, alone, in the middle of the afternoon, when she almost never shifted, when she usually stayed close to the house and the library and the quiet corners where she felt invisible. B. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of a wolf at rest, but a cold, airless void. No Vixen. No sarcasm, no eye roll, no dry commentary about how everyone was being ridiculous. Just nothing. The silence from her wolf was the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. The silence lasted 3 hours. 3 hours during which Desmond sat on the floor of their bedroom, the pile of returned shirts beside him, and felt the absence of her wolf like a missing limb. He'd sent Rowan and 2 others to track her scent, not to chase her, just to make sure she was safe. Rowan had texted back, Found her by the creek, wolf form, not moving much. She's okay physically. I'm keeping my distance. Physically. The word that meant everything else was not okay. He should have gone to her. Part of him wanted to, but Rowan had added, "Give her space, Des. She needs to come back on her own terms." Rowan was right. Rowan was always right. It was deeply annoying. "We could bring her a shirt," Apex offered, tentatively, as though approaching a problem he knew he wasn't qualified to solve. As a peace offering. Wolves understand gifts. We could leave it by the creek and retreat, like a wildlife documentary. The alpha male approaches cautiously, carrying a Henley. "That's not how this works." "It is exactly how it works in nature," Apex countered. "The male presents an offering, the female assesses the offering. If the offering is acceptable, mating continues. We have an excellent Henley, the one with the frayed cuffs. It has a very high scent rating. Please stop narrating our relationship like a David Attenborough special." "The narration is soothing and factually accurate," Apex said. Despite everything, despite the sick feeling in his gut and the cold emptiness where B's wolf should have been, Desmond almost smiled. His wolf was an idiot. But even idiots could see what mattered, and what mattered was that he was sitting here counting shirts while his mate was curled up by a creek, alone, because he'd made her feel like a problem to be solved. So he did the thing he should have done 6 weeks ago. He went to the guest room, opened the closet door, and looked, really looked, at what she'd built. The nest was half dismantled now, the shirts she'd returned leaving gaps like missing teeth. But the structure was still visible, still legible, and what he saw made his chest crack open. It was not a pile. It was not a mess, not a hoard, not the symptom of something broken. It was a home. She had woven his clothes into a circular structure, layered and deliberate. The heavier garments, his work jacket, the wool blanket, forming the outer walls. The softer things, the Henley, the worn flannels, lining the interior. Every piece was placed with its scent facing inward, so that the center of the nest was a concentrated, enclosed space that smelled overwhelmingly of him, of safety, of the thing she'd been looking for her entire life. He reached out and touched the sleeve of his mother's cable-knit sweater, the one with the lopsided collar. B had placed it at the very center, the innermost layer, the heart of the structure. It was the piece that smelled most like him, because he'd worn it 100 times, because his mother had made it with her own hands, because it was the garment in his wardrobe that meant home. She'd known. She'd known which one mattered most, and she'd put it at the center, because she understood something about home that he, who had always had one, had never had to learn. That home is not a place. It's a scent. It's a texture. It's the specific weight of a sweater made by someone who loved you, and the knowledge that you are allowed to stay. She built a den. Apex whispered, and his voice was not a shout, not a boom, not all-caps bravado. It was small and odd and grieving. For us. She made us a home, and we told her to give it back. The shame hit him like a wall. Not the hot, defensive shame of being caught out, but the cold, clarifying shame of understanding, too late, that you have been the worst version of yourself. He had been annoyed. He had been counting shirts. He had been inconvenienced by the surface of a wound so deep she couldn't even name it. And instead of kneeling down and asking what she needed, he had demanded she return the evidence of her pain in a neat pile. He sat down on the floor of the closet, surrounded by the architecture of her loneliness. And he understood. Her wound was displacement, the bone-deep knowledge that she would always be asked to leave, that her presence was always temporary, that home was something other people had and she was allowed to visit. She built the nest because she couldn't say the words, "I am afraid this isn't mine. I am afraid you will realize I don't belong here. I am afraid that one day you will ask me to go, and I will have nothing to take with me that smells like staying." And his wound, the one he carried so close it had become invisible to him, was inadequacy. The terror that he wasn't enough. Not strong enough to lead the pack, not wise enough to fill his father's shoes, not good enough to be the mate she deserved. His father had ruled through silence and expectation, a man who believed that love was a concession and vulnerability was a flaw. Desmond had spent his adult life trying to be different, trying to lead with warmth instead of fear. And the moment bees nesting had made him feel incompetent, unable to manage his own wardrobe, unable to understand his own mate, he had reached for his father's voice. The cold one, the hard one, the one that said, "This isn't normal," when what it meant was, "I don't know how to help you, and that terrifies me." They were mirrors. She hoarded things to feel safe. He pulled away to feel strong. She built walls of fabric. He built walls of competence. Both of them were just trying to survive wounds they'd never shown each other. He stayed in the closet for a long time. He didn't touch the nest, didn't move anything, didn't try to rebuild what she'd started to dismantle. That wasn't his to do. But he reached into the pile of returned shirts beside him, took the green flannel, the one she'd taken first, the one that had started it all, and placed it back in the center of the nest next to the sweater. A beginning, a wordless apology, a promise that he would do better. She came home at dusk. He heard the back door open, heard the pad of bare feet on the kitchen floor. She'd shifted back outside without clothes, which meant she hadn't been thinking about practical things, which meant she was still deep inside whatever the afternoon had broken open in her. He met her at the bottom of the stairs with a blanket and a mug of tea. No words, just the blanket around her shoulders and the tea in her hands, and his scent, his actual, present, here right now scent, close enough to breathe. She took the tea. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd done her crying alone, in the woods, in wolf form, where no one could see. Of course she had. That was how she'd survived. You don't cry in front of people who might use it as a reason to send you away. They sat on the couch in the living room, the fire crackling, the house settling into its evening quiet around them. Nate and Ellis were in the kitchen arguing about what to cook for dinner. A debate about whether pasta counted as a protein was reaching constitutional crisis levels. Someone was playing guitar badly on the back porch. The pack house sounds, mundane and alive. Desmond waited. He didn't push. He sat with his arm along the back of the couch, not touching her, just present, and he waited for her to find her way. It took a long time. The tea went cold in her hands. "I was 7, she said finally, and her voice was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear it. "When they died. I was 7, and I had a stuffed rabbit named Captain and a blue coat with buttons shaped like anchors. Those were my things. That was everything I owned that mattered." She paused, took a breath. "The first pack that took me in, I lived with them for 8 months. They were kind. They gave me a room with a window that looked out on a garden. I started to think," her voice caught. "I started to think it was mine, the room, that I could stay." She was quiet again. The fire popped. "They sent me away when their own pups came. Not cruelly, they just needed the room. They packed my bag for me, and they put Captain in it, and they said, 'You'll find your people, sweetheart.' And I never saw the garden again." Desmond's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. "There was one place, I was 14, where the alpha's mate used to brush my hair at night. She had this old silver brush, and she'd hum while she did it. I used to pretend she was my mother." Bee's hands tightened on the cold mug. "They moved territories after a dispute. When they packed, I think they just forgot. I woke up and the house was empty. The brush was still on the bathroom counter. I took it with me. I still have it." She said it like a confession, like admitting to a crime. "After that, I stopped. I stopped pretending. You don't unpack if you're not staying. You don't hang things on the walls. You don't—" She closed her eyes. "You don't nest. Because nesting means you think it's yours, and it isn't. It never is." The silence stretched between them, but it was a different silence now, not cold, just raw. "When I came here," she whispered, "when you brought me here, and you said, "This is your home." I didn't believe you. I still don't always believe you. Not because of anything you've done, because I don't know how to believe it. I don't have the muscles for it. I never learned. She turned the cold tea in her hands. Your shirts were the first thing that felt real. Your scent, it was the first thing that didn't smell like leaving. So I kept taking them. I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to stop, something in me would just... She pressed a hand to her sternum, a gesture of helpless frustration. It's like being hungry. You know you've eaten, but your body doesn't believe it. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wide open, unguarded in a way he'd never seen them. No walls, no retreat. Just Bea, stripped bare, offering him the ugliest truth she had. I know it's too much. I know it's not normal. I know Don't say it. His voice came out rough, wrecked. Don't you dare say what I think you're going to say. I'm a lot, she finished quietly. I know I'm a lot. And I'm sorry. He reached out and took her face in his hands, gently, the way you'd hold something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Beatrice, listen to me. You are not a lot. You are not too much. You are not a burden or a problem or a guest in this house. She started to pull away. He held her. I am the one who is sorry. I stood in that room and I counted my shirts while you were building a home. I heard my father's voice come out of my mouth, and I let it because I was frustrated, and frustrated was easier than scared. Her brow creased. Scared? Scared, he repeated. Because I don't know how to make you feel safe. Because I've been trying for months and you're still sleeping in a closet wrapped in my clothes, because that feels more like home than I do. And that, his voice broke, just a crack, just enough to let the truth through. That terrifies me, Bea, the idea that I'm not enough. Something shifted in her face, a recognition, a mirror. You are, she said, and her voice was suddenly fierce, suddenly the strongest he'd ever heard it. You are enough. You are the first person who ever, Desmond. You are the only thing that makes me feel safe. That's why I take your shirts, not because you're not enough, because you're everything, and I'm terrified of losing you. The words hung in the air between them, and somewhere deep in his mind, in the quiet place where the bond lived, he felt it. A stirring, a warmth, a faint, tentative sound. Oh, for the love of, are we done with the dramatics? Vixen's voice came back like a light switching on, hoarse and exhausted, but unmistakably, irreverently, her. Because that was genuinely awful. I don't ever want to do that again. The silence was terrible. Do you know how boring it is in here without me? You just have feelings, unnarrated feelings. It's a nightmare. She was back. Bea's wolf was back. A sound escaped Bea, half laugh, half sob. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the relief of Vixen's voice after hours of silence. It was like hearing music after going deaf, like feeling sunlight after a long, dark winter. Tell the large man he has approximately 4 seconds to hug us before I start critiquing his apology. It was adequate, a 7 out of 10. He lost points for taking 6 weeks to have this conversation, and also for the shirt he's currently wearing, which is a crime against fabric. Desmond pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her into his chest where she fit exactly, precisely, as if the shape of her had been carved out of him. She pressed her face into his shoulder and breathed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding for years. We have her, Apex said, and his voice was not a shout, it was a vow. We will not let go. She is home. This is non-negotiable. She may have all of our shirts. She may have our skin if she requires it. We will grow more skin. Gross. Vixen said, sweet, but gross. It is not gross, Apex protested. It is the most romantic thing ever said. It's biologically impossible and dermatologically concerning, Vixen shot back. But the sentiment is noted. Desmond almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he held her tighter and pressed his lips to her hair and said, very quietly, "The nest stays. All of it. And tomorrow, I'm putting everything back, plus the blanket off our bed, and you can have anything in this house that you need. Anything." She made a small sound against his shoulder. It might have been a laugh. It might have been a sob. It was probably both. Later, much later, when the fire had burned down to embers and the house was dark and quiet, he led her by the hand up the stairs to the guest room. She hung back at the door, uncertain, as if she expected him to have changed his mind. He walked into the closet, took off the terrible paint-stained shirt, his only shirt, his last shirt, and laid it in the center of the nest like a gift on a doorstep. "There," he said. "Now I don't have any shirts at all, so you might as well keep them." She stared at him, then at the shirt, then at him again. The laugh that came out of her was small and startled and real, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in weeks, and it lit up her whole face, and it lit up the room, and it lit up something in his chest that had been dark for longer than he wanted to admit. "Come," Apex said, not to Desmond, but to Bee, his thought voice carrying through the bond with a gentleness that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew the wolf only as a bombastic idiot. "Come into the den. It is ours. We built it together." Vixen's reply was immediate. "We accept. But I'm putting in a formal request for the leather jacket. And the boots. And possibly that scarf he wore last Thursday, the navy one. It has an excellent hand feel. I have standards." "Granted," Apex declared. "Everything is granted. Take the jacket, take the house, take the entire forest. Oh, don't offer us things you can't take back," Vixen warned. "We will take the entire forest. I already have plans for the southeast quadrant. There's a very promising patch of wild mint that—" "Take it," Apex said. "Take the mint. Take all the mint in the world." They curled up together in the nest that night, wrapped in wool and flannel and linen, and the warmth of two wolves who had finally stopped running from different things and run toward each other instead. Her head was on his chest. His arms were around her. The nest smelled like both of them, their scents woven together the way they were meant to be. Pine and chamomile, wood smoke and honey. "I want to move this," she said softly against his collarbone. "Move what?" "The nest, out of the guest room, into our room, where it belongs." He tightened his arms around her. "First thing tomorrow." "And I want," she hesitated. "I want to unpack my bag." He went very still. She'd kept a packed bag under the bed since the day she'd moved in. He knew about it. He'd never mentioned it. It was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. "I'd like that," he said, his voice thick. "It might take me a while, to really believe I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere, Bee. Take all the time you need." She was quiet for a long time, and he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, very softly, "I think there might be something else." "Something else?" "With the nesting. I've been dizzy and tired, and the nesting has been more lately, more urgent, more instinctive, like I can't think around it." She paused. "My wolf has been weird about it, quiet, which is not a thing she does." In the back of Bee's mind, Vixen said nothing, which, for a wolf who had an opinion about everything from the thread count of flannels to the appropriate way to organize a pantry, was itself a very loud statement. Desmond's hands stilled on her hair. His wolf, the bombastic, ridiculous, endlessly loud Apex, was suddenly and completely silent. Then, very slowly, Desmond lowered his face to the curve of her neck, the place where her scent was strongest, where the bond lived in her skin, and breathed in. Pine, chamomile, honey. And underneath it, faint but unmistakable, something new. Something he'd been smelling for days without recognizing it. A sweet, warm note threaded through her base scent like a new color appearing in a familiar painting. His heart stopped. Then it started again, faster. "Bee," he said, and his voice was shaking. "I think your wolf knows exactly what's happening." "I told you it wasn't the stress," Vixen said, and her voice, for the first time since Bee had known her, was gentle. Genuinely, unguardedly gentle, without a single sharp edge. "I knew weeks ago. I was waiting for you to be ready to hear it. You were so scared of wanting things, and this," she paused, "this is a very big thing to want." "A pup," Bee whispered, and her hand found Desmond's in the dark and squeezed, and she was crying and she was laughing, and she was home. Desmond held her, shirtless and weeping and incandescently happy, in a nest made of stolen clothes in a closet in a house that had been home to 5 generations of his family, and understood, finally and completely, why she had been building. Not just a nest, a nursery. A den for something she hadn't dared to hope for. A home for a family she'd never let herself imagine. "Shirts are irrelevant," Apex declared, his voice ringing with the solemnity of a royal proclamation. "We will never wear shirts again. Shirts are for wolves who do not have a mate and a pup and the most perfect den in the history of dens. Marcus will cancel the replacement order. Marcus will burn the spreadsheet. This is a day of celebration. This is the greatest day. I need to tell everyone. I need to howl. Can we howl? We should howl." "We are not howling at midnight," Desmond said, but he was smiling so hard his face hurt. "We are absolutely howling at midnight," Vixen said, and for the second time her voice was warm, without armor. "Our pack should know. We built something. It should be heard." They howled. The whole house woke up. Marcus appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, looking like a man who had been personally victimized by the universe. Rowan appeared behind him, took one look at Desmond's face, and burst into tears. Nate and Ellis, still half asleep, shifted in the hallway and added their voices to the chorus, not knowing why, just knowing that their alpha was howling, and it sounded like joy. The Blackwood pack house, on a Tuesday night in November, sang, and in the center of the nest, wrapped in a stolen sweater and the arms of her mate, Bee pressed her hand to her belly and felt, for the first time in her life, the absolute, unshakable certainty that she was never going to have to pack her bag again. 3 weeks later, Desmond came home from a pack run, 12 wolves, dawn light, frost on the ground, the kind of run that left you loose-limbed and half-drunk on cold air, to find something on his pillow. A shirt. His old gray Henley, the one with the frayed cuffs, the one that had started everything. It was clean, folded with care, and it smelled faintly of chamomile and honey and the new, sweet note that was already changing everything. A gift. Not taken, but given. Not hoarded, but shared. He picked it up and pressed it to his face. "She gave us a shirt back." Apex bellowed, his voice thick with an emotion so large it could not be contained in any volume, caps or otherwise. "This is the most romantic thing that has ever happened. More romantic than the nest. More romantic than the howling. This shirt is a priceless artifact. We must frame it. We must build a display case. We must put it on," Desmond said. And he did. And it smelled like her. And it smelled like home. And it was the best shirt he had ever worn. From down the hall, in the nest, their nest, the one that now lived in the corner of their bedroom, plump and well-maintained, and recently expanded with 2 new blankets and a truly excessive number of pillows, he heard Bee laugh. It was a small sound, a private sound, the sound of a woman who had spent her whole life packing her bag, finally learning to unpack it. "You'd better appreciate that," Vixen said, her voice carrying the old familiar sharpness, but softer now, worn smooth at the edges like sea glass. "I lobbied hard for that Henley. It has sentimental value. And the cuffs are disgusting." "I love those cuffs." Desmond Foss, alpha of the Blackwood pack, stood in his bedroom in a Henley with frayed cuffs and listened to his mate laugh, and knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a wolf who had found his home, that he was the richest man alive. His wolf, predictably, agreed. We are wealthy beyond measure. Our assets include 1 mate, 1 pup, 1 shirt, 1 den, 46 pack members, and a spreadsheet that Marcus is going to have to delete. This is everything. This is more than everything. This is enough. For once, Apex was not an idiot. He was absolutely 100% correct.